Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to break down something pretty wild, how a single decision, a ban on social media, ended up toppling an entire government in Nepal. It's an incredible story of tensions that were simmering for years, and the one final push that made all the dominoes fall.
I know. It sounds like a crazy headline, doesn't it? A social media ban brings down a government? But that's exactly what happened. So let's really dive into this, because to understand how the government fell, you first have to see how all the pieces were set up, just waiting for that one little nudge.
You see, a crisis like this never just appears out of thin air. For years and years, Nepal has been dealing with this really toxic mix of deep-rooted political and economic problems. It basically created a nation on a knife's edge, a real political tinderbox, just waiting for a spark.
And if you want to understand the frustration, just look at this timeline. It's absolute chaos. After the monarchy ended back in 2008, Nepal had 15 different governments in just 17 years. Think about that for a second. 15 governments. That's a new one almost every single year. How can you possibly build a stable country or make long-term plans when the leadership is a revolving door? It's just impossible.
And all that political chaos, well, it absolutely hammered the economy. Nepal's per capita income was just $5,380. Now, to put that in perspective for you, it's not just a low number. It's roughly half of its massive neighbor, India. This number isn't just a statistic. It represents the daily struggle for millions of ordinary Nepali citizens.
So, with no opportunities at home, what do people do? They leave. A staggering 60,000 people were migrating out of Nepal every single month to find work. Let that number sink in. That's over 2,000 people a day packing their bags, leaving their homes and families behind. It created this massive brain drain and a generation of families just torn apart by economics.
Now, the money that these migrant workers sent back home, it wasn't just helpful, it was literally the lifeblood of the entire nation's economy. An absolutely astonishing 33%, that's a full one-third of Nepal's entire GDP, came from these remittances. This created an incredibly fragile situation where the country's entire economic stability depended on its people working abroad and being able to send that money home.
And when you put it next to India, you really see just how precarious this whole setup was. For India, remittances are about 3.5% of its GDP, which is significant. But for Nepal, it's a third of their whole economy. This wasn't just a part of their economy, it was a fundamental vulnerability woven right into the fabric of the nation.
But here's the kicker. Even with so many people leaving the country, the economic pain for those who stayed was immense, especially for the youth. The overall unemployment rate was hovering around 12%, which is already high. But for young people, for Gen Z, it was over 20%. They were facing the absolute brunt of all this economic failure.
So you've got this economic pressure cooker building up, and then you throw in this massive, growing sense of injustice. People were fed up with widespread government corruption, and they were seeing this phenomenon they called Nepo babies, the children of the political elite living these incredibly flashy, lavish lifestyles and then posting all about it on social media for everyone struggling back home to see. The anger was palpable.
So, with all this tension just simmering right below the surface, it only took one single government act to light the fuse on the whole tinderbox. This was the final straw.
It all kicked off with what seemed like, just a bit of bureaucratic red tape. The government told all the big social media companies they had to register in Nepal and get a local officer. The companies, well, they didn't comply. And instead of negotiating, the government just dropped the hammer and banned over 20 social media platforms just like that.
Now, the government could call it regulation all they wanted, but for the people, this was something else entirely. Remember all those millions of migrant workers? Social media was their main way, often their only way, to talk to their families back home. This ban wasn't just silencing online chatter. It was like the government took a pair of scissors and cut the lifeline connecting families.
And that was it. That was the moment. This single act, piled on top of all those years of political frustration and economic misery, just unleashed this powerful, immediate wave of protest, led by the very people who felt the most left behind.
And the government's response? It just poured gasoline on the fire. When the Prime Minister, K.P. Oli, was asked about the impact of the ban, this quote came out. He basically said he was not worried if people lose jobs. A comment that dismissive, at a time like this, it was a slap in the face and it made people furious.
So of course, people hit the streets. Protests erupted everywhere. And who was leading the charge?
the young people. The movement was quickly nicknamed the Gen Z protest because it was the same generation suffering from that 20% unemployment, watching the Nepo babies online who are now out there demanding to be heard.
The government tried to clamp down hard, but it was just too late. The momentum was too strong. The movement had a life of its own. And those dominoes we talked about, they started to fall fast.
And the outcome? It was swift, and it was total. The sheer scale and the persistence of these demonstrations just completely wiped out the government's authority. With immense public pressure bearing down, Prime Minister KP Oli had no choice but to resign, and his entire government came crashing down with him.
Now, a government falling is always huge news, right? But for its next-door neighbor, India, this was more than just news. The crisis in Nepal created immediate ripple effects, and the stakes for India suddenly became incredibly high.
To really get why this is such a big deal for India, you have to understand who's on the border. That would be the SSB, or the Sashastra Seema Bal. They're the Indian paramilitary force responsible for guarding the very long and very open border between the two countries. They are India's first line of defense against any spillover from the crisis.
And what a border it is. You see, the instability in Nepal isn't some far-off foreign policy problem for New Delhi. It's a direct, on-the-ground domestic issue for 5 Indian states: Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, West Bengal, and Sikkim. A potential flood of refugees or any other security threats coming across that open border is a massive, massive concern.
And then, of course, you have the great game of diplomacy. The prime minister who was just forced out, KP Oli, he was known for having a pro-China stance, which always made India a bit nervous. His fall creates a whole new chessboard. On one hand, it's a huge risk. More instability could actually push Nepal closer to China. But on the other hand, it's an opportunity for India to build a better relationship with whatever new government comes next.
And that leaves us with the critical question, doesn't it? The people of Nepal have shown their power and taken down a government. But what happens now? Will all this upheaval finally lead to a more stable, responsive government? Or will this power vacuum just turn Nepal into the next great battleground for regional powers like India and China? The future of an entire nation, and maybe the region, is hanging in the balance.